Gene Hackman was a Hollywood legend who had been living in complete isolation, far from the Hollywood spotlight. After his death, the FBI made a shocking discovery. They uncovered a hidden network of tunnels beneath his Santa Fe home, and what they found inside left even the FBI stunned. Strange artifacts, cryptic documents, and other secrets no one was ever meant to uncover. What was Gene Hackman hiding underground? And why did it take such long for the FBI to uncover the truth? For years, Gene Hackman had been a ghost, retreating into a quiet life with his wife Betsy Arakawa, far from the glitz and chaos of Hollywood. While some retired actors still made the occasional public appearance, Hackman was different. He had stepped away completely, as if he had never existed in the industry at all. No interviews, no sightings at award shows, no nostalgic social media posts reminiscing about his career. That's what made the discovery inside his Santa Fe home all the more shocking. It began with a routine maintenance visit, something mundane, the kind of checkup that happens every day in homes across America. The worker had arrived expecting to handle a standard issue, but instead, he found something unsettling. The front door of the house stood ajar. At first, he called out, expecting Hackman or Arakawa to answer. As he cautiously stepped inside, he saw no immediate signs of struggle, just an eerie stillness that settled over the place like a thick fog. When authorities arrived, what they found confirmed the worst. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were both dead. There was no immediate sign of foul play, no clear indication of what had happened, but something felt off. As investigators moved through the house, carefully combing through each room, they noticed something strange in a back section of the property. The floor in one of the smaller rooms, a place that looked as though it hadn't been disturbed in years, had a slight indentation, almost imperceptible. It was the kind of thing most people wouldn't think twice about. But to the trained eyes of law enforcement, it hinted at something more. When they forced it open, they weren't prepared for what lay beneath, a tunnel. But not just any tunnel. This was no simple crawl space or forgotten storm shelter. What they had uncovered was an elaborate underground network, meticulously constructed beneath Hackman's home. As investigators ventured deeper, they discovered something even more perplexing. The tunnels weren't empty. Hidden within were stacks of books, old maps, journals filled with handwritten notes. Strange antique artifacts lined the walls, some covered in dust, others appearing as though they had been handled recently. A section of the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, almost like a secret underground study. A desk sat in the center, covered in loose papers, some of which contained mysterious sketches, diagrams of something unknown. And then there were the locked cabinets. Whatever Gene Hackman had been doing in the last decades of his life, he had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. The discovery of Gene Hackman's underground tunnels sent shockwaves through the media, igniting a frenzy of speculation. What was their purpose? Why had a man who had seemingly retired into a life of peaceful seclusion gone to such lengths to build a hidden tunnel beneath his home? Some believed the tunnels were nothing more than a secret bunker, a paranoid construction born out of Hackman's desire for ultimate security. Perhaps, in his later years, he had grown fearful of crime, of societal collapse, of forces unknown. The world had become more chaotic, and maybe, like so many others, he'd wanted a place where he and his wife could disappear in case of an emergency. The fact that the tunnels were wired for electricity and contained supplies suggested that they were more than just a passing project. They had been carefully designed for sustained use, but others weren't so sure. The strange artifacts found inside the tunnels raised unsettling questions. Investigators uncovered items that didn't quite belong, pieces of history that seemed curated, as if Hackman had been collecting them for a reason. Ancient books filled with handwritten annotations in the margins, maps marked with symbols that had no clear meaning, aged, yellowing photographs of people who had yet to be identified. What was he studying? What had he been searching for? And, perhaps more importantly, why had he felt the need to hide it underground? Then came the whispers of something even more sinister. For years, conspiracy theorists had spoken in hushed tones about the hidden underbelly of Hollywood, the secret networks of influence and power that operated behind the glitz and glamour. Some claimed that Hackman, despite leaving the industry, had never truly escaped, that he had knowledge of things the public was never meant to know, things that could put him in danger. Had his tunnels been a refuge from something or someone? Officially, the authorities ruled that Hackman and his wife had died of natural causes, a tragic but unsurprising end for an aging couple. But some investigators weren't convinced. There were details that didn't quite add up. For one, why had Hackman made no calls for help, even though his phone was fully operational? If he or his wife had been in distress, why had neither of them attempted to reach out? Even stranger was the state of the house itself. One of their dogs had been found locked in a closet, while the others were discovered unharmed. And then there was the most disturbing aspect of all, the speed with which the FBI intervened. Typically, a case like this would fall under local jurisdiction. An elderly couple found deceased in their home, no apparent signs of foul play. Why would federal agents take control of such a case? Yet, within hours of the discovery, men in dark suits had arrived, quickly securing the property and restricting access to the tunnels. They confiscated files, took possession of certain artifacts, and left without a word. The public was given only a censored version of the story, the official narrative carefully managed. As the days passed, speculation only grew. Some believed Hackman had been silenced, that his death was no coincidence, that after years of staying out of sight, he had finally been found by whatever he had spent his final years trying to escape. Others wondered if he had left something behind, some truth hidden within those tunnels, something that someone had been desperate to retrieve before anyone else could uncover it. On the surface, it seemed like a simple tragedy, an aging Hollywood legend, living out his final days in seclusion, passing away quietly in his own home. But as investigators dug deeper, one thing became clear: nothing about this case was normal. The first major clue: Hackman's pacemaker data. Modern pacemakers don't just regulate heartbeats, they also store crucial information, including the exact moment a heart ceases to function. When investigators accessed Hackman's device, they discovered something chilling. His heart had stopped beating on February 17th. That meant he had been dead for 9 full days before anyone found him. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. When forensic examiners analyzed Betsy Arakawa's body, they noticed an inconsistency that raised far more questions than answers. Her state of decomposition didn't match Hackman's. While both had clearly been deceased for some time, Arakawa's body showed fewer signs of decay. In other words, she hadn't died on the same day as her husband. She had likely been alive for days after his passing. That should have changed everything. If Hackman had died on February 17th, what had happened to Betsy Arakawa in the days that followed? She hadn't left the house. She hadn't contacted anyone. Her phone was there, fully operational. The landline still worked. There was no record of her reaching out to a friend, family member, or emergency services. No desperate messages. No attempts to seek help. It was as if she had simply waited in that house, alone, until she too was gone. And then came the 911 call. The maintenance worker had been the one to make the grim discovery. His voice was steady when he first reported what he had seen: one dead body inside the home. He had been careful, precise, and specific. But minutes later, in a follow-up call to emergency services, he corrected himself. Now he was saying there were 2 bodies. How could someone walk into a home and fail to notice a second body? Was it possible that he had simply overlooked Arakawa at first? Or had something changed in those crucial moments between his first and second call? The police investigated the maintenance worker thoroughly. They combed through his history, looking for anything that might suggest foul play, a criminal record, unusual financial transactions, connections to the couple. But they found nothing. No motive, no link to Hackman or Arakawa beyond his routine maintenance visits. He was an ordinary man who had stumbled upon an extraordinary scene. Yet the internet wasn't convinced. And the biggest mystery: the dogs. Inside the house, authorities found 3 dogs. 2 of them were weak and dehydrated but still alive. The third, however, was dead, locked inside a closet. That single detail set off a storm of speculation, as dogs can't lock themselves in closets. Someone had put it there. But why? Some believed the dog had been poisoned, that maybe it had eaten something it wasn't supposed to, or had been intentionally harmed. But toxicology reports came back clean. There was no trace of poison, no sign that it had been drugged or injured in any way. It had simply been trapped inside, left with no food or water until it couldn't survive any longer. Others wondered if the dog had been locked away during some kind of struggle. Maybe something had happened in that house, something violent, and someone had forced the animal into the closet to keep it out of the way. But there were no signs of a fight, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, no evidence that anyone had struggled. Everything in the house was eerily undisturbed. That left only one possibility: maybe the dog had been hiding. Maybe in those final days, it had sensed something it was terrified of. Animals have instincts that humans don't. They can pick up on danger long before we do. Could it have hidden away on its own, only to get trapped? Or had someone, maybe Arakawa herself, put it in there for a reason? With so many strange details in the case, people began coming up with theories, each one trying to explain what had happened inside that house. The first and most logical explanation was that it had all been a tragic accident. Hackman was 95 years old, he had heart problems. It was entirely possible that on February 17th, his heart had simply given out. Maybe he collapsed suddenly in the foyer, unable to call for help. Arakawa, panicked and in shock, may have rushed to get his medication. but stress can do terrible things to the body. And she wasn't young either. Maybe in her frantic attempt to save him, she suffered a medical emergency of her own, perhaps a heart attack or a stroke. Her body had been found near scattered pills in the bathroom, as if she had been reaching for something when she collapsed. If she had fallen unconscious, it would explain why no calls for help were made. It would explain why no one had heard from them in days. It would even explain why the two surviving dogs had been left without food or water for so long, but it still didn't explain everything, especially about how the dog ended up in the closet or why the FBI had taken such a deep interest in the case. And it didn't explain the maintenance worker's confusing 911 call. That's where the second theory came in. Some believed there had been a third person involved, someone who had entered the house either by invitation or through a means that left no trace. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no disturbed locks. Nothing had been stolen, and there was no immediate evidence of a struggle, but that didn't mean someone hadn't been there. If this person wasn't there to rob the couple, then their reason for being inside the house was something else entirely. A conversation, an unexpected visit, something that started out ordinary but took a turn for the worse. Something that ended in silence. If an unknown visitor had been inside the home, it could explain the strange inconsistencies surrounding the discovery of the bodies. The maintenance worker, the first person to enter the house after days of no contact, made an emergency call to report what he had found. At first, he was clear. He had seen one body inside the home. Minutes later, after stepping further in, he made another call, this time reporting two bodies. A sudden shift, a contradiction that didn't make sense. The police investigated him thoroughly, combing through his background, checking for anything that might connect him to Hackman or Arakawa beyond his routine visits. They found nothing. No criminal history, no suspicious activity, no motive. By all accounts, he was an ordinary man doing his job, unfortunate enough to stumble upon a deeply unsettling scene. But the uncertainty surrounding his phone call remained. Something had changed in the few minutes between his first and second report. Something had made him hesitate, made him rethink what he was saying. Then there was the third theory, one that tried to make sense of the unusual timeline. Maybe Hackman didn't die right away. It is possible that he had suffered a fall, an injury that left him too weak to move. And in those critical moments, he simply wasn't able to call for help. At 95, even a minor accident could have been devastating, leaving him in a fragile state, struggling to hold on. If that were the case, Arakawa may have spent her final days trying desperately to care for him, doing everything she could to keep him alive. She might have been tending to him, bringing him water, administering whatever medication she had, convinced that he would recover if she just stayed by his side. But caring for someone in that condition, especially alone, would have taken a toll. The stress, the exhaustion, the emotional weight of watching someone you love fade away could have been overwhelming. If she'd been deprived of sleep, running on adrenaline and desperation, her mind might not have been thinking clearly. At her age, the physical and emotional burden of the situation could have been enough to cause her own health to deteriorate rapidly. Maybe she had suffered a medical emergency herself, a stroke, a heart attack, or even extreme dehydration, leaving her unable to reach out for help. She could have become disoriented, confused, incapable of processing what was happening as the days dragged on. If that were the case, it would explain why she never left the house, why no calls were made, why no one heard from them for over a week. But even if all of that were true, even if she had simply been too sick or too weak to reach the phone, there were still things that didn't add up. The timeline was still off, as Gene Hackman had been dead for 9 days before anyone found them, but Arakawa's body wasn't in the same advanced state of decomposition. That meant she had been alive for at least some of those days after his passing. But even if that were true, it still didn't explain why she never made a call or why the dog was locked up in a closet. Even if the theory of slow decline and tragic isolation explained some aspects of what happened inside that house, it didn't explain everything. There were still too many gaps. Too many unsettling details that did not fall in place. To this day, the FBI has refused to release full details about what was found in the tunnels beneath Gene Hackman's home. The official story is simple. The case is closed, and there is nothing more to investigate. But for many, that explanation doesn't sit right. Too many strange details remain unexplained. Too many questions left hanging in the air. The tunnels weren't just some forgotten basement or a harmless personal project. They were carefully designed, reinforced, and hidden from the world. And whatever was inside them was important enough for the FBI to take immediate control of the investigation. The more you look into it, the stranger the mystery gets. Every piece of evidence that could explain what happened seems to disappear. The letter that Betsy Arakawa wrote, missing. The phone call made from inside their home just before they died, no sign of it, except in the call records. The private memoir Hackman had been working on, some pages were gone, and the ones left behind only made things more confusing. It was as if someone had carefully removed parts of the story story, leaving only bits and pieces, just enough to make people curious, but never enough to reveal the whole truth. Then there was Hollywood, a place that once honored Hackman, where he had been a legendary actor, was now oddly quiet. Normally, when a famous actor passes away, tributes flood in. Colleagues, directors, and producers share their memories. Fans celebrate their work, but this time, it wasn't like that. Nobody wanted to say anything. Reporters tried to contact people who had worked with Hackman, but most refused to speak. Others gave short, vague answers that sounded scripted. It wasn't just silence, it felt like fear. It was almost as if saying his name, talking about his death, or even mentioning the strange details of the case could be dangerous. Even the FBI, who were directly involved in the investigation, gave very little information. They only confirmed one shocking fact. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa did not die of natural causes. That detail alone should have led to more questions and investigations. But instead of giving answers, it made things even more confusing. The authorities never gave an official cause of death. No detailed report was made public. There was no press conference, no attempt to explain what had happened. To make things even stranger, the FBI ruled out carbon monoxide poisoning and environmental toxins. There was no gas leak, no injuries on their bodies, and no signs of a fight. It was as if every possible explanation had been removed, leaving only a case full of unanswered questions. Investigators knew what had happened, but they refused to tell the public. It was almost as if the truth, whatever it was something they didn't want the world to know. Hackman was always known for playing strong, no-nonsense characters, men who weren't afraid to stand up to corruption, who always seemed to be one step ahead. But in his final years, it seems his real life was far more complicated than any of the roles he played on screen. He lived in near total isolation, cutting himself off from Hollywood, from interviews, from public appearances. And now, with the discovery of these tunnels, some wonder if his seclusion was more than just a desire for peace and quiet. Was he hiding from someone? Was he protecting something? Or was there another reason he went to such great lengths to keep this underground network a secret? Maybe the tunnels were nothing more than a personal retreat, a space Hackman built for himself, away from the outside world. But if that were the case, why has the FBI refused to disclose exactly what they found? Why were federal agents so quick to take control of the property, shutting down any further investigation? Was there something down there that was never meant to be discovered? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. Gene Hackman's story didn't end with his retirement from Hollywood. In many ways, the biggest mystery of his life was only just beginning. What do you think really happened beneath Hackman's home? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.